The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. Today I have Lolita Allgyer. She is an entrepreneur, Praxis. I don't know where else we can go. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Lolita.
Entrepreneur in Praxis is pretty great.
Yeah.
While it's been a while since I started my own company, the company that I did start was a small business raising dogs when I was in high school. Other than that, haven't started a lot of businesses of my own yet. Right now, my entrepreneurial goals are kind of more in the startup space, working for a company that someone else has started, so I can kind of learn kind of what it's like on that home front of being able to build a company. So I feel like entrepreneur is a little bit of a big title that I still have to work up to. I don't run a company of my own right now, but thank you anyway.
Yeah.
I do work for Praxis as a content strategist and coach, and also chose Praxis before I joined the team, chose Praxis as my higher education after graduating high school. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's go down that path of education, right? So you have an interesting look at education, because I feel like you've seen both traditional and some homeschool, and now you went into the Praxis piece. Tell us a little bit about that journey let's go from kindergarten to where you are now.
Yeah, so my basic education, if you want a quick overview, was private school until 6th grade, homeschooling for the rest of high school until I graduated at 17. And then Praxis kind of as like the capstone to my education experience. In private school, it was just your typical like base education, reading, writing, arithmetic, like doing all of the things. I tended to be the kid I loved school. I really did. I loved learning. And kind of, I took my own approach to it, but didn't really think about education as being separate from school at that time. I just thought that school was the way you learned. And tended to be the kid that got done really early with the work, was sitting around like, what's going on, reading all of the library books, asking a bunch of questions, tutoring other children. That's just how it worked at a small private school. A lot different, of course, from public school, but still that's just kind of, the way it works for me. 7th grade was when my parents made the decision to homeschool us. And other than like leaving my friends, I was very, very excited about that. I found very quickly that homeschooling actually gives you more social opportunities than less. But, when you're leaving for the first time, you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be studying alone. What is this going to be like?
Right.
Through homeschooling, I was able to deep dive into subjects that interested me for as long as they interested me. For example, I studied psychology and body language for 3 months, like very, very strongly, wrote a research paper on it.
Nice.
And wouldn't have had the chance to do that had I not had like the autonomy in my education.
Yeah.
Seriously considered going into psychology during that time. And that's probably the one thing that homeschooling gave me the biggest ability to do, was kind of figure out and learn about careers long ahead of what most of my peers did.
Yeah.
Another example of this is when I completed a mock trial, in high school, and I delved deep into it. Like I studied Jerry Spence, one of the best defense attorneys, and I took my role in this mock trial very, very seriously. And I think honestly, like I got 6 months of law school probably in that time that I was taking in that semester, just because I put my heart and soul into it. At that time was like, hey, like law might be for me. I really enjoy this.
Yeah.
At the end of the semester, I realized how emotionally involved I got in a fake case that wasn't even real people, which was like my best friend, playing the murderer. And I realized, what, if I'm so emotionally involved in this and it really hit me this hard, I don't know if it's something for me to do full time. But again, that's what that autonomy, being able to study things on your own, gave me this ability to just study into whatever I wanted to and follow down that rabbit hole. And I think that is a key to education that we're missing today. It's one of those things that has impacted the way I try to help other people learn and the way that I myself learn today. The other advantage I had while homeschooling was the ability to start a small business of my own.
Yeah.
And my parents recognized that doing this and having something that would actually be bringing me money was going to be one of the best things for my education. So I spent my days like doing algebra in my big dog house that we built. It was like a 10 by 10 house where each of them had their little like house with the puppies and everything. And I would be holding puppies in my lap and doing algebra. And I would say that while I enjoyed the traditional part of the education, I tested well. I did that part very well. But the thing that I learned the most from was that business, because number one, I had to wake up every morning and go put the work into that. There's absolutely nothing like these animals depend on you. They need you to keep them alive. Nothing teaches you better than that kind of responsibility.
Yeah.
The second thing was just being able to sell things. Like these are $900 dogs that you have to sell to someone else and find homes for. You can't just keep 10 $900 dogs running around as much as I wanted to. And being able to sell and market those things and then learn from those experiences, that was probably one of the most valuable experiences I had during my high school time. And this really started shaping the way that I was thinking about education. Again, at the time, I didn't realize that I was so like involved with education kind of as a thing. I just knew that I was learning and enjoying it.
Yeah.
And then as it came time to kind of make decisions about college, I graduated early at 17 years old. And I knew like, I didn't really want to go to college at the time, mostly because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet.
Right.
I saw that as being okay. I thought, you know what, like I have time to figure this out. I don't need to do one specific path and kind of get this figured out. If I want to go to school, in 5 years, I can go to school and figure that out when I need to.
Right.
But if I don't have to go into debt for it yet, I don't want to. And I thought I was the only person that thought this way. Started doing some research and found that there's actually a very growing, great community involved around alternative education and the alternatives that are available to the traditional educational route. And in doing so, stumbled across Praxis.
Yeah.
Praxis is a 6-month boot camp combined with a 6-month apprenticeship, basically offers an alternative to business for a lot of young people. Also perfect for someone who really doesn't know what they want to go into yet.
Right.
The advantage of Praxis is it's debt-free and you get a bunch of experience to boot. And I see this and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's a model about what I've been thinking about that's already been built. Like I've had this conceptually in my head. I just didn't know that there was, a school or an educational model built on this.
Right.
So I applied to the program, got accepted, joined. The rest of the story is, my story, and it's an incredible part. Completed Praxis, completed their boot camp, and when I was about halfway through the boot camp, the founder, Isaac Morehouse, who I think has been on the show before, the founder, Isaac Morehouse, reached out to me and he said, hey, we can tell that not only do you love the Praxis program, you're enjoying what you're doing, but you're also very passionate about our philosophy.
Right.
And he said, so I know you want a sales role. That's kind of the goal that you had coming into Praxis. But if you would like to, you can just complete your apprenticeship here at the company.
Nice.
Well, in the Praxis community, it's probably everyone's like number one dream to be able to work for Praxis. So of course I accepted the offer and took on this apprenticeship with Praxis instead of a traditional apprenticeship that they would normally have with one of their business partners.
Right.
And since then have been working for the company, got a full-time job after my 6-month apprenticeship ended and have been enjoying it. So that's kind of like my educational story up to this point. There's a lot that is still going to change. I am not opposed to going back to school at all. If I find something that I'm very interested in that needs like a degree, to work for. But the disclaimer is that I have so many things that I'm still enjoying that I really enjoy studying that can be learned online for free in my own time. And unless it's something very specific that I need that degree for, I'm going to stick to this style of learning.
Absolutely. And yes, I've had Isaac on, I've had TK, a couple other grads as well. And there was a post that you kind of threw out there on Instagram lately. And it really struck me because it was like, hey, we need to change something. I mean, the alternative education route is a good evolution, but we are also finding that there's a lot of students that are I don't want to say stuck, but they're just the traditional system isn't working 100% for them, and like yourself. So with that being said, what kind of things do you think that at least a couple of tweaks in the traditional system that they should probably start looking at, and we'll call it basically sixth grade on, that really isn't happening right now, that you see coming down the pipe, or something that you would actually, if you were a lawmaker in education, you would change this right away?
That's a very, very deep question. So the Instagram post actually comes from a blog post I wrote a couple months ago called "You Are the CEO of Your Own Education." And with that kind of perspective in mind, the approach that I take isn't so much like, what can we do to change like the system as it is, but what can I be doing to help other individuals change their lives on an individual basis? Yeah. So I will get to your question, but my approach to this education tends to be, what can we do to help each individual? What can I be doing now, to impact, one individual's life? Because in the end, we can talk about systems all day long, and we can, get these things, actually, these policies into action. We can try to get them to change something for the system. But in the end, it's really like, how can each individual find their own unique learning method and learning style? Yeah. The thing is that a system worked pretty well before, when like a lot of jobs were kind of similar. You kind of branched out and followed, especially in the factory age, when everyone either worked in factories or was a mechanic. You had the basic trades and careers that everyone went into, and they had the basic education that it took to do those things. In today's world, everything is so diverse. Yeah. I can even be in the exact same career as someone else, but it looks completely different. And just because we're in the age of information, we have so much available to us, not only in what we can do, but in what we can learn. It's hard to put a system together that will be like universally applicable to people. So when I tend to look at education reform, if you want to call it that, I tend to look at it more on, what's one thing I can do to help somebody else become the CEO of their own education, to help somebody else, impact their own life. That being said, I think one of the most important things that, teachers, lawmakers, people can kind of realize as they're thinking about education, especially high school education, is not giving students so much information, but giving them a framework from which to build their own education off of. Mm-hmm. So you can learn, for example, that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. But if you don't know how that's applicable to your life, it's going to be hard to find value in that. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're teaching them, more of a framework, like, okay, here is how to build your personal brand and showcase the things that you're learning. Here's how to write in a way that impacts people. Here are the basic communication skills you need to go on. Those kinds of frameworks, I think, are the most important. How the best way is to implement that, I'm not exactly sure. I think one of the best educational models for learning this kind of thing is the classical education model, where basically you have like 3 stages. First, the grammar stage, where you're learning a lot of information. It's kind of it's not all together. You don't know exactly what, everything means. That's the younger kid stage. Right. The second stage is kind of the stage where you're starting to put everything together, and you're kind of learning, you're learning the basic amount of framework for it, how to write. You're learning how to, put those things into your own words. And then finally you hit the rhetoric stage. I'm trying to remember, there's 3 stages and I don't remember their exact names. But the final stage is basically where you're not just learning the information anymore, but you're learning how to have discussion, dialogue about it. You're learning how to put it into action in your own life. You're learning how to impact other people with this. And that kind of framework, I think, is something that we could get better as teachers, as educators working with individuals, as schools working with individuals, as lawmakers putting systems together for individuals. I think that we could get better at implementing these kind of frameworks that allow our students and allow these young people to be able to plug in the information and the things that are valuable to them in a way that impacts the world.
I think as a secondary ed teacher, one of my biggest challenges is actually keeping these students engaged, right? I mean, there comes a point, I think, when we're constantly trying to consistently tell them what to do or what to learn when they already know. And we're seeing that more and more because of the information age. And that's something that is a challenge, because you have traditional educators like, I'm still the holder of power in the knowledge, and then you have the students who are like, what are you talking about? The way I look at it is very similar to what you have actually done. Is you with Praxis, you've taken a secondary or post-secondary ed and actually attached what the young people understand about business, the quick, I understand this, I can find the answer, I can attach it. But the education system, you blow that out of the way, and then you're like, okay, well, this is what's happening in the business world. And we're going to mesh those two together, because it's right now, traditional education, in my opinion, is in some ways a roadblock to those two, the youth and actually what's going on out there. And so, to put that to play, my question then with putting that into play where people start to actually take action, how were you taught to actually take action? Because I think we're talking about, like in our education systems, we talk about a framework to build a student to get them ready to understand how they learn. But it's still kind of scattered around. So I'm curious, when we pulled out, you did use your grammar school, and how did that transition into, hey, now I can figure out this and I can go deep into this on my own, and this is my style. What did that look like for you? Because I'm very curious about that.
I would say that was probably a very smooth transition, just because I was the one always stuck in the corner on the couch reading anyway. And I just realized, I'm not sure when the switch happened exactly, but at some point I realized, like, oh, this time that I spend reading, that's not free time, that's education time. And realizing that, I can use this as my education, and I can kind of grow this. And then once you realize that, kind of building like, okay, now how can I put this into action?
Yeah.
And I think one of the best ways that I learned how to do it, and that it's also something that I think that any education can kind of impact, something that maybe could change on a policy level as well, is instead of trying to cram information into our students' minds, instead focus from the perspective of like a project, which is kind of a framework to build something into. Yeah. And what I did for myself was kind of build these projects around the things that I was learning. The mock trial, for example, was one example of that, where you could have handed me a law book and said, okay, read this.
Yeah.
Would I have learned as much? Absolutely not. But because of saying, hey, you've got this case, you are the defense attorney.
Yeah.
Now you have to go figure out how to defend your client. I was encouraged and given the basis to have a really great framework to be able to learn law and what it's about and what it takes and what the career can be like. So that's one example of the way that you can learn so much more, and you can appreciate the skills that are around everything that you're learning, everything that's involved and plugged into the things that you're learning, rather than just learning, disconnected bits of information and trying to plug them into your own mind. So I would say first that light bulb moment of realizing that, hey, if this information that I'm taking in, like if I'm just sitting here reading a book, this is education. It doesn't have to mean me sitting at a desk and doing a test. That doesn't have to be education. And then the second thing is giving myself something physical, something tangible to focus on, rather than focusing on information, application.
Yeah.
Putting that together in like a perspective that gave me, a plug-in for that application.
Yeah, I love that explanation, and I think we're trying, and the shift is happening. I think it's across, several different levels of education, and it's a challenge, and obviously change is something that's extremely difficult, and it's disruptive. That's why we have disrupt education, right? So what is next for you? What's coming up for you? You're working in this wonderful program. What do you think is next for Lolita?
So right now I'm working, I have a lot of different, interests that I'm working on. Studying like the finance world and economics has been very interesting to me. That's kind of just like a side hobby. I love studying cryptocurrency, although I'm definitely no expert. I love studying, how the financial world works, how stock markets work. That's super fun. That's kind of like one of those things that's, hey, it's over here. It's the fun thing. I don't know how I'm going to apply it to my career, but it's really fun to study. But branching outside of Praxis, of course, my career is in marketing technically, and then in coaching. And both of those take high communication skills, the ability to, quickly solve problems. So I'm still focusing on that as my education. Like, just because I've worked here a year and a half doesn't mean like, oh, okay, now I need to figure out something to learn. No, this is a full-time education.
Yeah.
It is a job, yes, but like I am learning so much every single day. And on the side of that, though, I have also been really wanting to expand my skills as a writer. I enjoy writing a lot. I enjoy communicating ideas with people. So kind of finding the best way to expand in that. That's kind of my goal for 2020, to be able to get a couple more articles published. Got my first one published in the Objective Standard last year.
Congrats.
That was a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this year, technically. It was this past summer. But kind of expanding on that, being able to build my skill as a writer, find out like where my niche is in the writing world, being able to work on that, and then branching out from there into public speaking. That's probably a little more of a goal into 2021. But kind of that's like my 3-year kind of setup.
Yeah.
Where writing, speaking, kind of going from there, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
I'd still like to start my own business at some time. I think that's a very valuable experience for anyone.
Yeah.
I would love to actually be the CEO of a company at some point, but there'll be time for that later too.
That's why I put entrepreneurship out there on your title, just because I'm forecasting here. Tell us where people can find you, where people can find Praxis personally, and your business, the business that you're working for. Where can people find you online?
Praxis is discoverpraxis.com. And at Discover Praxis on most social media platforms, you'll be able to find us there. My personal website, which I haven't been doing much on recently, it is LolitaAllgyer.com. That's another 2020 goal that's going to get built back up, and I'll start putting content out there a little more. And I am pretty active on social media as well. Happy to connect. I am at Lolita Allgyer or at Lolita_Allgyer on most social platforms.
Thank you so much, Lolita, for being with us today on Disrupt Education. You are a true kind of a trailblazer, and I appreciate your story, because we know that there are a lot of students here that may not want to go the traditional route or don't really know what to do. And by sharing your story, you've really hopefully broadcasted it out to a few of the listeners here that are like, hey, you know what? Yeah, that sounds interesting, and may even spark their interest on Praxis.
Yeah, and my perspective is more, regardless of what educational model you choose, like even if you're going through traditional higher education, focus on your goals and focus on building yourself a framework for education that allows you to see that education as a lifelong goal, a lifelong commitment, rather than something that you have to graduate out of. Because once you get that, it really doesn't matter what model you choose, what route you choose to take. You'll be able to build yourself a good education and be able to change the world through that. That's kind of my perspective. That's
an excellent mindset and a great way to end the segment. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, guys, until next time, we'll see you on Disrupt Education.